On Friday morning at 6:15 a.m., some residents of Swannanoa, North Carolina, received an emergency alert on their phones. This screenshot was sent to me by somebody living there. It reads, "Mandatory evacuation in your area, severe flooding, high water can cause loss of life and property. Move to high ground, away from water, do not delay." This text came after several other emergency alerts were sent throughout the night from the National Weather Service, indicating that a flash flood was in progress. And those alerts were sent at 3:16 a.m. and 5:30 a.m. prior to the evacuation order. Now, some people in the area say they didn't receive these alerts at all. Maybe their phones were off, or they didn't have a cell signal, or they were asleep. But for the most part, it didn't matter. The final evacuation alert was too late for many of them to escape. Before dawn, the water was so high that lawns were submerged. Floodwaters had risen more than 4 feet in less than 1 hour. 911 calls wouldn't connect. The worst of the storm was already underway at this point. The full extent of the devastation and the number of lives lost remains unclear. What we do know is that much of Swannanoa and many other parts of the southeast have been destroyed. Cars are hanging from tree limbs. Many homes have been ripped from their foundations and tossed upside down. More than 130 people are dead, with bodies being found every hour. Several people who sought refuge on top of their homes awaiting rescue drowned when their roofs collapsed. Over the past 2 days, I've received several emails from people living in Western North Carolina, and they all say the same thing. The federal government failed. For all of the billions of dollars that FEMA spends on preparing for disasters, they didn't provide early warning about the potential impact of Hurricane Helene. They didn't issue an evacuation order soon enough. And after the devastation, they didn't provide immediate resources that could save lives. Here's a message that was sent to me from Ashe County, North Carolina. This is a rural area of the state. They're faring even worse than the cities are. Some of the houses have more than 36 inches of water that they're sitting in now. Quote, "I have seen the devastation with my own eyes and have employees and friends in the mountains that will not have power for weeks. I'm a paramedic for a neighboring county. There have been no FEMA personnel sighted in our area, even though the danger has passed. Our electric cooperative has been amazing, and they're the ones building roads, clearing land, and doing overflows. This morning, we saw some Black Hawks doing flyovers, but that's the first ones. I've been told the DOD is refusing to allow helicopters to fly into our area, even though the service members want to help." The man adds, quote, "We're coming together, and churches and volunteer fire departments are delivering water and food. As we get cell phone service, we're reaching out to friends. Lowe's ensured a huge delivery of generators was delivered yesterday and no price gouging. Everything that's happening is from locals helping out, churches delivering, local food banks and businesses. Local government emergency management is doing everything they can. The federal government is failing in every sense of the word. The focus has been on the areas that have money and honestly seem as if they vote a specific way." Unquote. Now, there are many more reports just like that one. The journalist Nick Sortor reported yesterday that, quote, "Shelters in West North Carolina are over capacity and do not have enough food, and FEMA is nowhere to be found. One shelter was 30 meals short. What the hell's going on? Where are Biden and Harris?" Meanwhile, the New York Post reports that, quote, that due to the breakdown of law and order, 8 migrants were just arrested for looting in eastern Tennessee in the aftermath of the storm. They're between the ages of 24 and 51 years old. Charges include burglary and aggravated burglary. These are crimes that the federal government enabled on 2 separate occasions. First, they let these criminals into the country, and then they failed to ensure law and order in the aftermath of the storm. On WMAL yesterday, the executive director of Ascend Women's Center in Asheville, a woman named Christy Brown, made it clear that more assistance is desperately needed. People don't have food or water. Listen.
They're having to manage how many can go in at a time so it's not a stampede. Lines for gas are like 3 hours long. So yes, many of us probably did not prepare as well as we should have. Like, I bought bottled water, but did I think I was going to be without power for 5 to 8 days? No, I didn't.
Right.
So did I buy enough? No. And in the Asheville area, we have a lot of rural areas, and people live on mountaintops, and they live out past cornfields and that type of thing. So many times it's one lane in, one lane out, and you may have bridges. Well, when you have 30-foot surges of your water, nothing can withstand that, right? And so we weren't prepared But again, no one thought it was going to be as bad as it was. And now that we're on the storm has passed, now it's like, how do we build back this infrastructure so that you're not waiting 3 hours to get gas? Or if you go to the grocery store and you wait 45 minutes to get through the door, how do you assure that there is water on the shelf? It's the basics that people need right now, which is clean water, food. They need the ability to communicate because they don't have internet. So I talked to someone this morning who cannot get a hold of a family member since Friday morning. So she's worried sick, whether this woman's dead or alive. And then on top of that, her house was hit by trees.
So it should go without saying that the federal government should be doing everything it can to pour as many resources as it possibly can into every state that's been affected by this storm. This should be by far the most important issue that our government is focusing on, but that doesn't appear to be what's happening. For his part, Joe Biden was on the beach, supposedly making phone calls about the storm. You can only imagine how coherent those alleged phone calls would have been. And then Joe Biden declared that there's nothing more his administration can do for the people affected by the disaster that's happening in this country. Watch.
Got the awards for the victims of the hurricane?
Yes, it's tragic. Matter of fact, we're trying to get the exact number. My FEMA advisor is on the ground in Florida right now. There's a distinction between the numbers that FEMA's used and the ones that are used by the locals. So it really is amazing. You saw the photographs. It's stunning.
It's unbelievable. But
it really is.
Such a wide area.
And we've given them all everything that we have. We're on the ground ahead of time, so we're working hard.
Are there any more resources the federal government could be giving them?
No, we have pre-planned a significant amount of it, even though they didn't ask for it yet. Hadn't asked for it yet.
Now, when it comes to foreign aid, nobody in the Biden administration has ever said anything like that. Biden has never told Ukraine, yeah, you're good. You don't need any more money. We've given you all you can, all that we can. But when American citizens are drowning in their own homes, well, they're on their own, I guess. Biden doesn't seem to care that the shelters are full or that people don't have food. Neither does the acting president of the United States, Kamala Harris. Her response to the storm has included attending a fundraiser in Hollywood and reading a prepared statement off a teleprompter at FEMA headquarters without taking any questions. She also tweeted out this image to document her response to the hurricane, in which she pretends to be taking an important phone call as she holds a pen over a blank piece of paper. Now, you notice that her wired headphones aren't even connected to the phone. So to be clear, this was not a candid photo. This is the image that Kamala Harris's handlers choreographed and selected to send out during a crisis to project competence and control. But it does the exact opposite. It highlights what we already knew, which is that Kamala Harris is an actor miming the motions of what a competent commander-in-chief should be doing. And she happens to be a very bad actor. But Democrats are stuck with her now, so they're pretending that this isn't obvious to everyone. They're also banking that voters weren't alive in 2005 when Hurricane Katrina hit. Because you probably remember that the one enduring image we talked about briefly yesterday from Hurricane Katrina is this photo of President Bush flying over the aftermath of the hurricane, looking out the window of Air Force One, and you could see it there. This infamous photograph allegedly showed that Bush didn't care about all the people suffering on the ground, especially the black people, as Kanye West famously said. It proved that Bush was detached and uncaring, we were told. And for well over a decade, media organizations have referred to this photograph as one of the greatest blunders of Bush's presidency. Bush himself has apologized for it, calling the photograph a huge mistake. Now, of course, the outrage over that photo was totally contrived. Bush was there surveying the damage. He wanted to see it for himself. This is how you survey it, especially when you're the president. I mean, did they expect the sitting president to rappel down into the floodwaters and start personally rescuing people? Do they want him on a boat going to stranded people and rescuing them? Of course not. Of course, that's not what you want the president to do. If he had shown up to do that, to play hero, it would have been a scandal of its own, because then he'd be taking up resources for a photo op. So Bush did the right thing. He wanted to see what was happening with his own eyes. He didn't want to get in the middle of it and be a huge distraction. So he flew over the wreckage so that he could see it. Which is why, again, no one could ever explain what they think he should have been doing instead of that. By contrast, Kamala stared at a blank page and pretended to talk into a phone. We don't know where her plane was. If the media had any integrity at all, this would be a much bigger debacle than the Bush photograph, or at least one equal to that. There'd be the same level, at least, of mockery and outrage. But of course, there won't be because these people have no shame. And also, there's no racial narrative to spin up here because many residents of the impacted areas of North Carolina, unlike the residents of New Orleans, are white. And that might be why both the corporate press and the Biden administration have spent the last 24 hours instead talking about climate change, blaming climate change for this disaster. The federal government is supposedly blameless. It's not their fault, it's climate change. Watch the DHS secretary's response to the concerns of one mayor in North Carolina who complains that no one has cell service, which can obviously cause major life-threatening problems. Here's what he says to that.
I want to read to you something that the mayor of Canton, North Carolina said, talking about the frustration that a lot of people feel about the lack of communication. Here's what he said. It is unacceptable and disgusting that in our time of need, cellular service for the entire region is blocked out. There's no excuse for that. I mean, we knew the storm was coming. I can't believe this is a normalcy. Is this a systemic problem? Is this something that is going to be more and more normal as we see more and more devastating storms? What do you say to people who are desperate to find out whether people they love are still alive?
I well understand the concerns expressed. These are people in the midst of a tragic hurricane. That is precisely why we and others have been deploying communications resources to ensure that communication is reinstated as quickly as possible. The reality is that the severity and frequency of extreme weather events are only increasing.
So we've gone over this so many times that it's not worth showing all of the data at this point, but here it is anyway. There's been no increase in Category 4 or 5 hurricanes that have made landfall in the continental United States from 1900 to 2019. And as Michael Schellenberger has reported, the U.S. government's National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration predicts the maximum intensity of Atlantic hurricanes and tropical storms will rise 5% in the 21st century, but their frequency will decline 25%. The implication that it's unprecedented for a major hurricane to affect an inland area like Asheville is also false. A meteorology student named Chris Martz pointed out that Asheville was previously wiped out by the remnants of a hurricane all the way back in July of 1916. That was more than 100 years ago, long before we were supposedly emitting unsustainable levels of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So a disaster like this in a place like Asheville is very rare, which is one of the reasons, like we talked about yesterday, one of the reasons why the residents were not prepared for this, understandably, because it is very rare, but it's not unprecedented. So it's like a once-in-a-century kind of event. But how could it be a once-in-a-century event if it's all because of man-made climate change? Now, none of these politicians or media outlets will ever answer that question because their goal isn't actually to save lives. Their goal is to deflect responsibility for their own failures. One of those failures, a huge one, involves the government's persistent, almost incredible ability to waste money while mismanaging massive infrastructure projects. This is an actual systemic issue the Biden administration should be concerned with. Specifically, when the Biden administration rolled out its $40 billion plan to connect rural Americans to the internet all the way back in 2021, they cut Elon Musk's companies out of the program. The result was that nobody got internet access out in those areas. As the Washington Times reports, quote, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or BEAD, has not connected a single rural home to high-speed internet service since Mr. Biden signed the funding into law in November 2021. At the current pace of distributing the funds, high-speed internet connections to most of the rural areas intended to benefit from BEAD won't be completed until 2030. The Commerce Department, which is in charge of the program, said none of the projects will begin until 2025 or 2026. Mr. Musk's SpaceX is excluded from the BEAD federal subsidies because the money is reserved for companies deploying fiber optic cable, which the government views as a more proven technology than satellite connections. So they spent billions of dollars as part of a plan to implement broadband equity. Yes, broadband equity. And what does broadband equity mean in practice? Well, it means that nobody gets broadband. It means they cut Elon Musk's Starlink system out of the funding. Probably on a pretext because they don't like what he's doing on X. But Now that there's an actual crisis, that pretext doesn't seem to be a problem anymore. As you just heard the DHS secretary say, the Biden administration is deploying communications resources to North Carolina. More specifically, they're deploying Elon Musk's Starlink to the state. Here's a Biden administration official stating that they're installing Starlink systems now on an emergency basis so that people impacted by the hurricanes can communicate with the outside world. Watch.
We're also very focused on restoring communications capabilities. FEMA, the FCC, and private telecommunications providers are working together to help restore temporary communications as quickly as possible by establishing temporary cell sites and allowing for roaming where possible, where a resident can connect to any network available even if they aren't subscribed to that network. Today, FEMA will install 30 Starlink receivers in western North Carolina to provide immediate connectivity for those in greatest need.
Now, fortunately, people living in North Carolina don't need to rely on the Biden administration to get those Starlink systems online. There are a lot of private individuals bringing Starlink equipment into the state and setting it up. But again, none of this would be necessary if the Biden administration had done its job in the first place and spent the $40 billion on technologies like Starlink. So this is yet another problem created entirely by the federal government. At this point, there needs to be accountability, or more people will die, if not during this disaster, then during the next one. There were massive failures at every level in this storm, from the lack of an early warning to the aftermath where they blamed climate change as people are stranded on rooftops. We saw something similar in the Maui fires, where the authorities blocked evacuation routes during the blaze, in part because FEMA didn't have an effective evacuation plan in place. If you remember, during that disaster, people talked a lot about Kamala Harris's statements about how equity should determine who gets critical aid in a time of crisis. People pointed out that FEMA's top goal on its website was literally to instill equity as a foundation of emergency management. But then everybody kind of moved on. And yet Kamala remained in power along with the bureaucracy that actually runs the country. And now, just a year later, even more people are dead and stranded without any warning, and the government's incompetence is once again on full display. Saying that Helene is the Biden administration's Hurricane Katrina is actually underselling how callous this administration's response has been. For all the failures during Katrina, the general consensus among critics was that the government was either incompetent or indifferent. But George Bush never sabotaged, the attempts to get internet access to communities. He didn't use climate change as some kind of catch-all excuse while shelters were being overrun and people were dying. He didn't tell American citizens that there's nothing more he can do for them. He didn't go on a podcast and talk about how much he loves Doritos during all of this, as Kamala Harris just did. He also wasn't on the record saying that disaster relief should be distributed based on equity, as, again, Kamala Harris has said in the past. And just for good measure, let's go back and watch that clip again.
It is our lowest income communities and our communities of color that are most impacted by these extreme conditions and impacted by issues that are not of their own making. And so absolutely. And so we have to address this in a way that is about giving resources based on equity, understanding that we fight for equality, but we also need to fight for equity, understanding not everyone starts out at the same place. And if we want people to be in an equal place, sometimes we have to take into account those disparities and do that work.
So how much did this equity philosophy interfere with the federal government's response to Helene? We don't really know. We don't know the full extent of it. We'll probably never know. But when you watch clips like that and you see failures like what's unfolding right now, it doesn't look like mere incompetence or indifference. It looks like something else as well. It looks also like malice. Or as the Biden-Harris administration calls it, equity. The only reason more people aren't pointing this out is that when the next natural disaster strikes in your neighborhood, they want to administer some equity there as well. Lecture you about your gas stove while you're clinging to life on your rooftop. Nearly 20 years after Hurricane Katrina, it turns out that George Bush's crime wasn't that he failed. It's that he didn't fail the right people. In the name of equity from Hawaii to North Carolina, one botched disaster response at a time, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are finally correcting that mistake. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.